Thank you, Marco. And good morning to everyone. Thanks for being here, and thank you for the invitation to present our research. Yesterday was a lot about survey methodology and sampling theory and that sort of thing. Today, I'm going to show you how we used the results of that work that you do, which is fabulous, to try to understand an economic problem that's basic, which is how people choose their consumption. So you said the green button. There we go. Okay, so I don't really have time to tell you what I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you how the results of our survey have benefited from a lot of the rigor that you all have put into building these representative internet panels. There we go. Okay, so what our survey came from was a response to what's called the transformation of payments. And if you don't really know, there used to be this thing called a check. It's about this big. It's a piece of paper. People used to write a lot of them, and I just saw one being written, which to my surprise is very, very rare these days. And we know that because of our survey. So the Federal Reserve processed checks. It was an important part of its business, and it needed to figure out why are people finally writing fewer checks, and are they going to start using less cash? There's one right there. Yeah. By the way, that has your bank account number on it, which is really weird. Anyway, so so our goal was to figure out what happened and what are people going to start doing? What kind of electronic payments are people going to start choosing, and what should the Fed do in terms of developing an efficient payment system on the internet or electronically rather than in paper? And so we did some pilot surveys internally at the Fed, and then we developed a survey, which is a 30-minute survey online internet panel, and then we were so encouraged by that we had people carry around a diary and track every payment that they made every day for 3 days. So that was the development of that. Oops, there we go. Okay, so in a paper in 2018 that I published, I used these data. And I said, look, I know that the diary, the payments diary, was designed to collect dollar expenditures that consumers make every day. But that's not necessarily the same thing as what economists call consumption in the national income accounts, which is where GDP comes from, for those of you that might know what that is. So could we use these payment expenditures to find the economic concept of consumption? That was my question. And the answer was, whoa, can we? The total aggregate amount of consumption data that came out of the survey, which was intended for payments, not for consumption, was 92% of the gold standard in economic or in government statistics. It was 92% of the total, which is a remarkable ability to track the aggregate amount, right? And we never intended this product to do this, but it did it. So we must have been doing something right. So in the sequel paper, we're shoot. Can I go back? Yes. We're asking the question: we're just lucky? Was that a fluke? What have been the effects of improvements? There've been a number of improvements since 2012. What are the effects of that on this validation exercise? And then importantly, we hadn't looked at income, and the diary also collects income receipts. So do those also do as well in matching aggregate data? And more importantly, for studying economic behavior, if we use the individual respondent data as that from a consumer, does the model of consumption that we rely on in economics do these data fit that model as well as they do with other data? And so we wanted to know that. And then in this field, there's a lot of what we call big transactions data. People get it from banks, people get it from apps like mint.com or something on your phone. And the question is, how do our data match up to those which are maybe measured better, but are not representative, which is the great advantage of the diary. Come on. Do I get extra time for this? Okay. So a recent critique in the literature included our work And this was a survey of all big data sources, the ones I just mentioned, right? And so there's a lot of research in economics that's not using surveys, but they're collecting transactions data, right? And what we're trying to show is that this collection data is just as good as the transactions data, maybe even better because of its representativeness. So they gave us a little kind of a backhanded compliment here. It's nice, but it's not good enough because it's too small, not enough observations, okay? Because observations are expensive, right, Tanya? And they're right about that, but there's a lot of advantages to using the survey, the internet panel survey, right? Because we can do better measurement. We have very precise measures. We can develop what we want, not what the banks collected. It's a more representative sampling time frame now at UAS. It has new information on financial information as well. But the four main advantages are it's representative, it's available to the public, which all that transactions data is not. And there's lots of room for improvement or to put it into the field to do field studies. Okay. I'm not going to go over this, but we extract from the payment expenditures estimates of consumption that are consistent with national income accounts. This is the visual form of the survey in the diary. So a survey is taken first in September, and that sets up the information for the diary. So people are selected after they've taken the survey, they're randomly selected to continue into the diary. And they take a 3-day diary. They start the first night, and then each day they record their information and they enter it themselves online in the panel. But to make it representative, and the reason I think we're getting such good estimates of the aggregate is we randomly distribute those panelists, those waves across the month. And that works out great for aggregate estimation, but it's a nightmare for using this for microeconomic research of regressions of individual consumers. All right, here's the bottom line. So the top line is the standard in government statistics, and the two lines below it are the DCPC, the diary, and another on the left-hand side, the CE, which is run by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is supposedly the gold standard of consumption. And we estimate a higher level of consumption than they did, even though we weren't trying to do that. On the right-hand side is income. And here income is not only the Bureau of Economic Analysis, but the IRS. So we're not quite as close to that with the received income that the respondent records, but the household income that they report as part of the broader My Household questionnaire actually over predicts income relative to the government statistics. Okay, so what can we do with this high frequency data that matches aggregate data really well? We could use it for real-time forecasting analysis. So what I did in the earlier paper was try to estimate the level of consumption for the month of October using data starting on October 1st. And you can see, depending on where it starts, it's off. It's not quite that the flat line is the annual estimate. I'm sorry, that is the aggregate estimate for the end of the month. But by about 10 days into the sample, we have an estimate of the level of consumption that is within the standard error of what the diary is going to estimate, which we know is pretty darn good. What we're doing now is instead of that, that's nice, but what we really want to know is, can we predict the growth rate of personal consumption expenditures, which is part of the national income account, it's part of GDP. Can we predict that using the growth rates of the consumption on a day-to-day basis? And the answer is, again, it's very volatile early on, but it eventually settles at exactly the growth rate of the GDP, the consumption from GDP. It's remarkable. Now we can run regressions, and we won't go into any of these details here, but this is where the challenge comes in, is that the benefits of the sampling design, which are great for validating aggregate data, are really tough when you start running individual regressions, because we only have 3 days of a person's consumption. We don't have their whole consumption. So what we do is we build synthetic cohorts. So we'll divide people up into common groups, and then we take the mean within that group, which is still representative. And then now we have a longitudinal panel of 31 days over 5-6 years. That's what we run the regressions on. And the bottom line is, for those of you that are not consumption theorists, we get coefficient estimates that are very similar to data, the aggregate data used from official government statistics. Okay. We also can replicate findings in the literature that when you get your income, the day you get your income, you tend to spend a lot more that day, and then it dwindles down. We replicate that exactly, but we have more information about the types of consumption payments and the types of income, and so we can vary that in ways that have not been done in the literature. And then here's what's really, really valuable that I think every survey methodologist who's found this boring so far should hear. The importance of a nationally representative internet panel is crucial, because these big data efforts go and grab stuff wherever they can. And you know, there's one out there that has JP Morgan's bank account data. Well, that's great. But I'm telling you, the customer of JP Morgan is not representative of US consumers. I hope none of you are JP Morgan customers. It's not a knock, it's just a fact, right? So we need representative estimates so we can know whether these great big data that were downloaded off of a phone app are representative or not, okay? So what we do with the data is we divide it up into, that's the same 5 minutes I had in my, oh, wait. Where's the back button? Okay. First, so you're going to help me keep my promise to myself to finish early. So what we do is take a whole bunch of characteristics of people that you can't identify from a bank account or you can't identify from an app. We take a lot of characteristics and we divide samples and we run a bunch of bifold sample comparisons. And we show that the response of consumption to income is very different for certain groups that are selected that are similar to the big data sources that people are using. So that's a problem for us in economics because, oh yeah, it's great big data and it's really accurate and it's up to the minute, billions of observations. But if it's telling me that the relationship between consumption and income is wrong, then it's not so valuable, right? Okay, so this is a push for you guys to keep doing these nationally representative internet panels. This is crucially important. I can tell you, no objection, Wilbert. This is crucially important for, at least for economics, of getting the answers right. Okay, so for example, we find whether they're a revolver or a convenience user of credit card matters a lot. Whether they check their records in answering the survey, this is really neat. So people who check their records are more likely to behave according to the basic consumption model. And those that just did it on the fly are not. Very interesting. And there's a big difference according to net worth, which you don't always have with, or rarely have with these big data sources. Whoops, I did go back. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. We focus in the last part of the paper on one particular application, which is pretty cool. This survey tracked whether or not people had downloaded and used a personal financial management tool. Right? Actually, it's whether they had adopted it. We don't know whether they actually used it, unfortunately, because we didn't think about that. But these are things like mint.com or, you know, MoneyWise, Budget Simple, these kinds of things. So if somebody has one of these, we had a prior that they must be doing much better in their consumption saving plan because they're managing their money well, right? Now I got 2 minutes. That's all I need. So we wanted to know, is that true, right? And so what we can do is we measure the adoption and we run some regressions to tell us what kinds of things matter. But only about 6% of the population has these things. And there's a paper published in one of the top 4 journals in economics that used mint.com data, which is only about 6% of the population. All right. So they didn't know that at the time, but now they do thanks to our survey. All right. So we don't know whether they used it or not, but we ran some regressions on adoption. There's some interesting demographic correlates. But mainly the point is we find mixed evidence. We find that some people actually do worse with the PFM and some do better. And I think the reason is that it's not clear why people adopt the PFM in the first place. Some people adopt it because they just love money management and they want to have everything and they track it carefully. Those people are already on a good consumption plan, saving plan for their life. Other people need it, and so they're trying to correct their problems. And so it's not clear what the exact answer is. But to finish up, there's tons of room to improve the measurement of this if the Fed would devote more money and effort to resources. It could improve the measurements greatly. There's opportunities to expand the data collection. It's only once a year. If it was just once every quarter, the Federal Reserve could use it for monetary policy analysis. And so that's all going to take money for the Atlanta Fed. Or if if they won't do it, the federal government might take it over. Who knows? But anyway, that's that. Oh, last thing is those diary data are not useful to outside users unless it was made available in real time. It's about a 1-year lag before we can get that data. But if they could make it so that it was coming out every day, then people could use it to forecast at high frequencies. You could take this diary and put it in the field just before a hurricane, just before a randomized tax rebate, just before something else, and measure what happened. And there's opportunities to merge it with other data sets, which is one thing we did with them. Is we brought some information about data breaches and sent it to USC. They matched it up with our data and came back with a distance from how far they were from a data breach. Okay, that's it.